Serious, historians, marine biologists, and cryptozoologists of Reddit. As far as legends in history go, what legendary creature do you believe may have been real and probably existed in some way? Or what supposedly legendary person in history was more than likely real? Archaeologist here. There's a really interesting ancient Egyptian story called The Shipwrecked Sailor, in which a man is washed ashore a beautiful island and is apprehended briefly by an enormous serpent. In the story, the serpent tells him that there used to be hundreds of others like him, but a falling star wiped them all out. I think it's unlikely that the Egyptians had knowledge of dinosaurs, but there's a site called Wadi Hittim that has thousands of ancient whale skeletons from the Eocene. I think it's possible they could have seen these skeletons and mistaken them for giant snakes. Herodotus actually tells similar tales of giant flying snakes in Egypt, and I suppose if you saw these skeletons but no trails, you might think they were capable of flight. Depending upon how they were excavated, I'd have to imagine the pectoral fins of a fossilized whale could even have resembled wings, though I'm not sure if any images of their flying snakes were winged. Beowulf, who is featured in one of the most important texts written in Old English, may very well have been real. The epic details what people Beowulf belonged to, the Geats, who resided in modern Jutland, and Ike, battles which have taken place according to historians, particularly between the Geats and the Swedes. Most intriguing to me are the facts that the location of Beowulf's burial mound is included in the epic, and that there is what looks like a hill at that location in modern Sweden that has never been excavated. Changelings, babies switched out by fairies, were probably an early explanation for birth defects. The Lusca, giant octopus. It supposedly lives in the blue holes of the coast of Florida, and the amount of food and temperature of water both support the theory of an octopus living long enough to grow way larger than we expect based on our current records. The Lusca, the Destination Truth episode about it is pretty cool. I've heard of a hypothesis that states the Ragnarok myth actually describes an impact event. The Midgard snake could be an object entering the atmosphere. There was a Bronze Age meteorite impact in Estonia that became a key element of Finnish mythology. Perhaps the myth percolated over to the Nordics. Many myths about sea serpents probably stem from oarfishes. They look like sea serpents, are absolutely huge, live in almost every ocean and sometimes wash ashore. I got all that information from a River Monsters episode though, so take it with a grain of salt. I regularly get to see pods of humpback whales at the beach where I surf. Most of the time, all you see is their backs as they partially surface from the water. Occasionally, one of them breaches mouth first, so you see a giant mouth emerge from the water. Other times, you see a giant tail emerge. If you were watching them and had no idea what a whale was, or that you were looking at multiple of them, I could easily imagine mistaking multiple whale backs as the coils of a colossal snake. I strongly suspect that this is the origin of legends of sea serpents. Very simple mythological creatures like black dogs were probably exaggerated stories of encountering wild dogs in the dead of night. They're often described as having glowing eyes, which isn't an unusual effect when torchlight is reflected in dogs' or cats' eyes. The black dog spirits myths of the British Isles are also likely the grim Professor Trelawney was talking about in The Prisoner of Azkaban. OROC could have been real. It was most likely inspired by the elephant bird of Madagascar. An elephant bird was like a big butt ostrich about 9 feet high. They didn't go extinct until the 16th or 17th century. For sure. Also, even a condor could appear and probably be misidentified as being twice the size it is if someone that wasn't familiar with it saw one in the wild. I forgot where I read this, but when people are afraid of something out in the wild, their accounts of it can make it out to be much larger than the real thing due to stress or fear. There are many diseases that the origin of the vampire myth can be traced back to, however I think rabies fits it the most. In the olden days, people would tie those suspected of it to trees. In about 3 days' time the disease would drastically change them. Extreme light sensitivity, paleness, aggression, excessive drooling. They would try to attack you and have bouts of either extreme slow fatigue or even adrenaline. Also, rabies can be passed from person to person through a bite, not just an infected animal. Rabies honesty sounds like how a modern zombie virus would work, but unlike science fiction, rabies is real and terrifying. The cyclopes of Greek mythology. Go Google up an elephant skull. There's this huge hole right in the middle of it looking to all the world like a single eye. Now add this to the knowledge that the Cretan dwarf mammoth left subfossil bones on Crete easily discoverable, was 1 meter at the shoulder, and could be more or less assembled into a giant humanoid. You don't even need to rearrange the bones, just make the skeleton stand on its hind legs, remove the tusks and boom, a cyclops skeleton. The Kraken. The mythological and terrifying creature that lived on the Nordic seas. The legend never clarified if it was a giant squid or anything else, but it's the most accurate thing. The legend may have been created by people devising the bodies of giant squids, 16 meters long, and they supposed it was a deadly monster. The Kraken was born. The Norwegians invented high carbon steel when they were making swords. They would out the bones of predators into the molten metal, which added carbon. The fact that they didn't grasp the scientific concept made it even more metal. The interesting part is that they believed that adding the bones to their weapons would imbue them with a kind of magic power, making the weapon stronger. The Maori people of New Zealand have long told stories of the pauke, a monstrous bird that was big enough to hunt and eat humans. Many believe that these stories are referring to the Haast seagull. It was the largest species of eagle ever to have lived on Earth, with weights of around 30 pounds and wingspans almost reaching 10 feet. It lived on New Zealand's South Island and primarily hunted the flightless moa bird, which weighed around 500 pounds. Given the large size of its main prey, it's likely that the eagle may have also targeted lone humans as well. Interestingly enough, the Haast eagle went extinct around the year 1400, not long after the Maori arrived in New Zealand. It's thought that its extinction can be attributed to habitat destruction combined with the extinction of the moa due to hunting by the Maori. There is a child's skull in a museum somewhere with markings on the back and front near the eye sockets. Originally, archaeologists believed it to be linked to violence or sacrifice, until they discovered it matched the talons of the Haast seagull exactly, and that it had been discovered in a pile of bones similar to the piles left by modern birds of prey. Kid was about 6 and got bird snagged. Chupacabra. It has to be some poor sick animal with mange. Mange is highly contagious, so if a pack of coyotes or wild dogs got it, they would all have a weird butt appearance and attack other animals out of hunger. Specifically sarcoptic mange, demodectoc mange can cause a similar appearance but isn't contagious Ike. But on that note, a lot of the video evidence I've seen circulated looks like coyotes with mange, a couple times raccoons. People don't realize just how weird certain animals look without their fur, but add crusty scabs all over and it can look like a monster. 1. I believe that stories of wild men, giants, hairy bipeds et al. Are rooted in hunter-gatherer cultures which existed on the periphery of civilization as defined by early subsistence farmers. 2. King Arthur existed as at least one post-Roman warlord. 1. I totally agree with this, and those sightings would get passed down as legends that would keep growing over time for sure. 2. Without a doubt, King Arthur's legend is simply too big to just be a tall tale, and he's probably even a collective legend of a few real-world leaders of lesser-known clans or knights. Sorry that I'm not so well versed on the human history side of this, but hundreds of years ago, the Scottish warriors had myths about their ancestors being giant, brutish warriors. It turns out, what happened is that the Scots found fossils of prehistoric bears which, especially to someone who doesn't understand anatomy as well as modern man, look surprisingly humanoid. They didn't know about prehistoric life, so they assumed these were their ancestors and gave them traditional burials with custom armor and weapons to honor them. You can imagine how the paleontologists felt when they started digging up prehistoric bears with custom fitted armor and weapons. The Wendigo probably existed, just not as a creature. People in the far north who survived a brutal winter by eating a family member had a psychological escape hatch for the guilt and horror by convincing themselves they were transforming into a ravenous, murderous beast. They'd continue killing and eating in a hysteric delusion that they had no control over it. Wendigo hunters would then have to come and kill them and perform a shamanic ritual to assure the rest of the tribe that the taint wouldn't spread. It's actually an incredibly fascinating study into culturally specific mental illness. The lengths the mind will go to in order to avoid dealing with a traumatic event are so extraordinary that in that culture they would actually continue to murder and cannibalize fellow tribe members under the delusion they had transformed into a monster. There's a small population of albino deer in my area and they are beautiful. Definitely ethereal looking and totally match the European description of a unicorn. The Piasa bird and the river panther, Miss Hibijiwa. There was probably some species of large eel-like species that existed in the Mississippi River that has long gone extinct. There are too many concurrent myths describing similar-ish creatures from different places and cultures along the rivers in the North America. Giant eels and even massive catfish definitely account for some serious lake and river monster sightings. There's pictures and records of a giant world record catfish reaching about 9 feet in length. And if one of those suddenly surfaced and plummeted, it would look almost exactly like a massive serpent or something along those lines. I'm actually a biologist, but this has nothing to do with that lol. My family is from Saudi Arabia. Back in the 40s, some tribal people still lived in these ancient caves on cliff sides, often in ravines, like they'd done for thousands of years. My uncle grew up in a town near one of those tribes. They had their own dialect of Arabic and kept to themselves unless they needed something, usually medicine or something like that. Apparently his whole town thought the cliff people were jinni, mythological fire spirits who can take human form, and so would never charge them for anything. They'd just give them what they wanted while praying under their breath. 1. Based on multiple descriptions of the Australian cryptid, the Beowulf, I firmly believe them to be seals who swam inland. 2. The kraken were likely colossal squid which swam up to the surface. 3. The black demon shark of Mexico is just a large great white with pigment issues. I believe a different theory on the Beowulf, that it's a story passed on about megafauna. The kraken probably existed. It could just be a colossal squid, but those sailors had to have seen something. You also have to remember how much smaller watercraft used to be. Large ocean-going vessels are an invention of only the last few centuries. A sail yacht you have at the marina is bigger than most historical boats. Even the carvels and junks that traverse the world were seldom much bigger than 20-something meters. When I was working in the Amazon, I was told of a creature called a chalanchaqui. They make gardens in the forest, generally of all one species of plant, and if you encounter them you are supposed to walk around them. If you must pass through you ask permission, walk through quickly, and don't touch anything. If you don't obey this, the chalanchaqui will attack you. Well, those forest gardens are the large hives of leafcutter ants, and if you spend any time inside them or disturb the vegetation in them, the ants will come out and attack you. Alright, as a historian, giants. They exist in some form over many cultures in history. My favorite story is about a Native American tribe that told the story of the giants that killed them to near extinction generations upon generations ago, and how they were a horrible beast and quite large, all the characteristics of giant. Truth be told, and this is probably true of most legends accounts of giants, that it's just a height relative thing. A majority of a population was quite small back in the day. Besides being easier to hide and run, less body mass meant less food needed and more chances of survival. But I digress. People were quite small, like average 5-footers and less. Anyone who was taller was probably considered a giant, and all whole tribe of giant people 5 feet 10 and above must have been especially terrifying when they were a warring tribe or just in conflict with you. So the generational story was just about a smaller height-wise tribe that encountered a taller height-wise tribe and they fought. The story of the giants. The natives have a lot of stories of supernatural creatures that were just odd to them humans. The pale-faced beasts were probably Vikings. Vikings caused a whole migration of a tribe as well. It's really interesting in my field of work to just put things in perspective. You gain so much. In Norse mythology, however, and consider that Scandinavians have always been relatively tall, giants really are described as massive. Just the saying that a lone and seemingly random boulder has been thrown there by a giant would give you a perspective. Camelopard, described as having the print of a leopard, with its body with a camel but an elongated neck and too many backwards horns. Nowadays referred to as a giraffe. Many thought it was mythical in certain parts of the world. When a giraffe was brought to China in the 1400s, it was identified as a qilin, a kind of Chinese-Japanese mythical beast, so they have a fine pedigree as mysterious creatures. Stupid long horses. Published archaeologists here, all over the world, from Siberia to Australia, the Himalayas to Ohio, mankind has told stories of tall, bipedal apes that live in the forests. The First Nations of the Pacific Northwest call them the Sasquatch. The Nepalese call them Yeti, but today most people refer to them as Bigfoot. There was an entire line of humanoids called the robust Australopithecines that evolved right alongside us. They were about 9 feet tall, extremely muscular, hairy, omnivorous, and importantly lacked the big brain that we got. Because they mostly fed on things like roots, they were mostly arboreal upright apes that had insane jaw muscles which required an anchor point on their skull called the sagittal crest. This is what separates our branch of the human family from theirs. While we lack the crest and have comparatively weak jaw muscles, we gain the power of speech and abstract thought while our robust cousins got by on brute force alone. Many sightings of Bigfoot often report a domed head, hinting towards the identity of the beast. Their fossils are exceedingly rare. As a matter of fact, all human fossils are rare, especially the really old ones. Nevertheless, the youngest robust Australopithecine fossil is dated to roughly 100,000 years ago. It is entirely possible that they survived long after that. As previously stated, the fossilization process is extremely difficult and some species pass into the dark without ever leaving a fossilized trace of their existence. If the last ones died out sometime around 11,000 years ago, which marked the Younger Dryas extinction event, they would have been around during the peopling of the world, solidifying their place in many cultures' mythology. Is it possible that they're still around today? There is a worldwide environmental collapse culminating in a mass extinction the likes of which the world has not seen for 65 million years. Species are dying out at an exponential rate and habitats are being annihilated for human habitation. If they have not yet gone extinct, they will be within our lifetime. P.S. The aliens did not build the pyramids, you absolute twats. The Kraken is totally a colossal squid that grabbed a boat thinking it was a whale. Boats were smaller back then by a large margin. A lot of yachts are bigger than most historical boats. And the creatures that lived long were probably able to get bigger due to humanity not yet having fished the seas near Barren and not yet having polluted the oceans with massive amounts of propeller and sonar noise. I think unfortunate people in the past with hair disorders where hair covers their body are the root cause of people thinking up the idea of werewolves. This, mixed with the likely solitary lifestyle they had because people found them scary, led to people thinking that they were less than human, and it wasn't long before someone said they were an animal, or at least half animal. TBH, having seen my Italian grandfather shirtless, I understand where they're coming from. The mythical kingdom of Prester John probably did exist. It's likely Ethiopia, but since information was passed slowly and through hundreds of retellings back in the 14th to 17th centuries, it's likely the story of Ethiopia was mistold after some period of time and respun into the story of the kingdom of Prester John. The only real cryptozoology stories that I believe are sighting of animals that may have still been alive after they were officially declared extinct. This would be things like the Tasmanian tiger, the Japanese wolf, and potentially the ivory-billed woodpecker. I love that there's still sightings of thylacine, and a lot of Aussies don't believe they're extinct. One of my anthropology professors, primate evolution, is convinced Bigfoot exists and is the result of a line of Gigantopithecus that survived and has avoided human detection and capture for 100,000 years. There are actually several anthropologists who believe this theory. Western concepts of sea monsters highly resemble plesiosaurs and similar extinct animals. Myths could have been created after those fossils were discovered. Or, hear me out, them shoots descendants are still swimming around. I know you probably meant descendants, but man, can you imagine how dang unsettling it would be if there were still ancestors of things that died so long ago they were fossilized still swimming around in the depths like some sort of immortal Lovecraftian nightmare. The belief on the existence of dragons started in Slovenia, where a cave animal, Proteus, which is a blind species of salamander, would be washed out from the caves to the surface during flooding periods. People used to believe they were baby dragons and their dragon mother would live inside the caves. There may have been a small population of Sasquatch-like creatures at some point, but I think the more likely creatures are the aquatic ones. Kraken and Loch Ness monster type things would leave less obvious evidence, with droppings and corpses disappearing into the depths. I'm not even one of the Bigfoot folks, but I'm hairy enough that I find it implausible there was never someone or something humanoid that fits the Sasquatch bill. Source: am a human male living in modern times. There are certain genus of moths that switch from nectar to blood when nectar becomes rare. Species are known from Eastern Europe. The moths don't have a needle-like mouth like mosquitoes. Instead, they literally saw through the skin and drink the flowing blood. They are mainly active at night, and due to their method, leave a hole where they drank blood. Humans are not an uncommon host. Perhaps some vampire stories have some of the roots in there. A dragon, but not the way you think. In Poland, where I live, there's one story of a dragon that nested under the hill called Wallen Krakow and demanded to be given food, otherwise he would kill people. The dragon was eventually tricked into eating food poisoned with sulfur and, according to the sources, exploded. But that's not important. The story, while it used the Polish name for a dragon, smok, never mentions any dragon-like features, not wings, no fire breath, no scales, etc. What I believe, I'm no historian, just a history nerd, is that the dragon in this story was actually human. He could freely communicate with other humans to threaten them, but was somehow seen as someone very dangerous, someone inhuman. It could have been a serial killer or a one-time murderer cornered into the cave who used his aura of dangerousness to try to buy some time while he looked for a way to escape. It could have been a person shunned by society for some mental or physical deformity who tried to make the best out of a bad situation. I believe that Grendel's mother, and the dragon from Beowulf's story were also human. If we accept that it actually existed, I believe that Goliath, of David and Goliath fame, might actually have been real, or at least, that it's possible he might have. Human gigantism is a well-known genetic mutation. The tallest known man in history was Robert P. Wadlow, who was 8 feet 11 inches. It's perfectly possible that in prehistory, there was someone who was even taller, whose name is lost to the sands of time. I recently watched a video about David and Goliath. The narrator made the case that Goliath may have had some form of gigantism, based on some subtle clues, like Goliath was led to the battlefield, and he might have had trouble seeing based on something he said. Like Goliath was led to the battlefield, and he might have had trouble seeing based on something he said.